The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by Fan EE33. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 35. Flora. Part 4. Jinling and the other juniors' hearts slammed against their rib cages. Terror ran through them. Terror that disaster would strike and Wei Wuxian would suddenly collapse with his hand covering his eyes. All they heard was his cry of "Ah!" Each of the youth's hearts leapt and their hair stood on end. "What happened?" Wei Wuxian spoke very, very quietly. "Shh! Don't say anything. I'm watching it." "What are you seeing? What's outside?" Jinling said, even more quietly than Wei Wuxian. Without looking away or turning his face, Wei Wuxian replied, How terrific." His expression, visible in profile, appeared full of heartfelt admiration. It stirred their curiosity, which rapidly overcame their fear. "Senior Mo, what's terrific?" Lan Sijue couldn't help but ask. "Ah, so beautiful. Be quiet, don't scare it off. I haven't looked enough yet." "Let me see," Jinling said. "I want to see too." "Are you sure?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Mm-hmm." Slowly, Wei Wuxian backed away, as though unwilling to part ways with the sight behind the window. Jinling was the first to squeeze his way through. He lined his eyes up with the gap in the wooden slats and peered outside. By this time, darkness had already fallen. E-City's mystical fog had thinned significantly in the night's chill. If he squinted, he could see several meters ahead into the street. Jinling watched for a bit, but, to his disappointment, nothing beautiful or terrific appeared before his eyes. "Did I scare it away when I opened my mouth a few moments ago?" Just as he was about to lose interest, a stick-thin figure suddenly appeared in front of the gap. Caught off guard, Jinling absorbed the sight head-on and felt as though his scalp had been blown off by shock. He almost screamed, but somehow he had mustered the strength to stifle his fear. Stubbornly, he maintained his bent-over posture and waited until the numbness in his head wore off, though he couldn't help but glance at Wei Wuxian. All he saw was that horrible person leaning against the windowsill, standing beside him, the corner of his mouth quirked upward. Wei Wuxian winked and smirked. "Isn't it beautiful?" Jinling glared at him, knowing that the man was purposely messing with him. He spoke through gritted teeth. "Oh, yes." Then, abruptly, he changed his mind. He straightened, turned, and pretended to be apathetic. "But it's only so-so at best. It's just barely worth a glance, that's all." After Jinling finished, he backed away, stood to the side, and waited for the next fool to step up. The remaining juniors, cajoled by both him and Wei Wuxian, felt their curiosity reach its peak. Unable to stop himself, Lan Sijue took Jinling's place. However, as soon as he pressed his eyes against the window, he let out a very sincere shout of "Ah!" and jumped backward, his expression full of startled fright. Helplessly, he turned in circles and searched for Wei Wuxian, successfully finding him only on the second go-around. "Senior Mo!" he said, voice full of accusation. "Outside! There's something outside, isn't there?" Wei Wuxian said knowingly. "You don't need to say what it is. It'll ruin the fun surprise. Let's let everyone have a look on their own." After seeing how terrified Lan Sijue was, the others were hardly willing to take his place. What fun surprise! A horrible fright was more like it. Each waved their hands in refusal. "We don't want to look! We don't want to look!" You're still trying to play tricks at a time like this, Jinling scoffed. I have no idea what's going on in your head. Didn't you play along? Wei Wuxian replied. Don't copy the way your uncle speaks. Sijue, was the thing you saw scary? Lan Sijue nodded. Yes, he said obediently. Correct. It should be scary. This is a great opportunity to improve your cultivation. Why do ghosts want to scare people? Because when people are frightened, it weakens their state of mind. Their life force surges, and that's when it's easiest for the ghost to suck away their yang energy. Therefore, ghosts and the like fear courageous people the most. If someone is brave, they aren't afraid, so the ghosts don't have any opportunity to steal their energy. Thus, as disciples of cultivation, a chief responsibility of yours is to cultivate your courage. Things like courage are innate. Some people are born timid and can't do anything about it, Lan Jingyi muttered, glad that he couldn't move and that his curiosity hadn't enticed him into looking. Were you born with the ability to fly a sword? Wei Wuxian asked. Didn't you have to practice to be able to do it? It's the same logic. You can get used to being scared. Latrines smell, don't they? They're gross, aren't they? But believe me, if you lived a month inside one, you'd even be able to eat in there. Everyone shivered and said in unison, Ooh, no we wouldn't. I don't believe you. It's only an example. Fine, I'll admit to it. I've never lived in a latrine, so I don't know if I could stomach eating in one. I was just saying things. But you all need to look at what's outside. Not just look. Look carefully. Look for the details. Unearth any hidden weaknesses in a short glance. You can't panic in the face of death. You have to look for an opportunity to strike back. Alright, I've said enough. Do you all understand? Ordinary people don't have the chance to listen to my guidance. You should cherish this opportunity. Don't shrink back. Stand in line and watch, one by one. We really have to look at it? Of course, I never joke around or play tricks on people, Wei Wuxian said. Let's start with, Jingyi. Jinling and Sijue have already taken a look. Huh? I don't have to, right? If you've been poisoned, you shouldn't move. You said so yourself, Lan Jingyi said. Stick out your tongue. Congratulations, you've been cured, Wei Wuxian said. Bravely step forward. Come. The cure works that quickly. You're trying to trick me, right? But Lan Jingyi's protests were futile, and in the end, he had no option but to straighten his spine and walk to the window. He glanced outside, then looked away, then glanced outside, then looked away again. Wei Wuxian knocked on the windowsill. Why are you afraid? I'm standing right here. It wouldn't dare break through the window or eat your eyes out. Lan Jingyi jumped away. I'm done looking. Then it was the next person's turn, and the next. Everyone nervously sucked in air through their teeth as they looked outside. Done? Wei Wuxian said after they had gotten through all the juniors. Then, everyone, tell me what details you saw. Let's combine our observations. Jinling cut in first. White pupils, female, very short and thin, not bad looking, holding a bamboo pole. Lan Sijue thought for a bit. The girl is roughly as high as my chest. The clothes she's wearing are shabby and she's a bit unkempt. She looks like a homeless beggar. The bamboo pole seems to be a cane for the blind. Her pupils might not have turned white after she died. She might have been blind when she was living. Wei Wuxian gave his evaluation. Jinling saw more, but Sijue was more perceptive. Jinling's mouth twitched. The girl is probably only 15 or 16, another youth said. Her face is shaped like a watermelon seed. She has delicate and attractive features, pretty and lively. Her long hair is held up by a wooden hairpin with a small fox face whittled into it at one end. She's petite and has a slim figure. Even though she's unkempt, she's not filthy or horrid. If you cleaned her up a bit, she's certain to turn out cute and beautiful." Hearing this proclamation, Wei Wuxian concluded that the speaker had boundless future prospects and praised him energetically. "Not bad, not bad. Your observations are detailed and distinctive. You're bound to become one of those passionate types in the future." The youth reddened, covered his face, and turned to face the wall, ignoring his companion's laughter. Another youth said, "It seems like the tapping sound came from her, from when she was walking. If she was blind when she was alive, she still wouldn't be able to see after she died. She has to rely on the cane." "But how could that be?" yet another youth said. "You've all seen blind people, right? Since it isn't convenient for them to get around, they all walk very slowly, like they're afraid they'll collide with something. But the ghost outside was very nimble. I've never seen such energy from someone blind." Wei Wuxian smiled. You've thought about this. Very good. This is exactly how you should analyze the situation. Don't ignore any suspicious details. Now then, let's ask her to come inside and clear up any doubts about this case." After he finished speaking, he immediately removed one of the wooden boards blocking the window. The youths inside the dim room and even the ghost outside were startled by his sudden movement. She raised her bamboo pole in defense. Wei Wuxian first waved to the ghost. "Miss, you've been following us this whole time. Do you have some business with us?" he asked immediately. The young woman stared at him. If she were living, she would have certainly been very cute. However, her eyes were absent of pupils, and 2 streaks of blood dripped down from her eye sockets. Now her appearance looked only sinister. Behind Wei Wuxian, someone gasped quietly. "What's there to be afraid of?" he asked. "You'll see a lot of people bleeding from everywhere in the future, but right now you can't handle seeing someone bleeding from only her eyes? That's why I'm making you experience all this, so you can learn." Meanwhile, the young woman had been circling around the window agitatedly the entire time, tapping at everything with her pole, stamping her feet, staring, and waving her hands with wild abandon. However, now her behavior abruptly changed. She gestured as though wanting to tell them something. "Strange," Jinling said. "Is she mute?" Hearing this, the ghost girl paused and parted her lips in his direction. Fresh blood surged out from the void that was her mouth. Someone had pulled out her tongue, root and all. The disciples grew goosebumps from head to foot and thought the same sympathetic thoughts. No wonder she can't talk, blind and mute. How horrible. Is she using sign language? Wei Wuxian said. Does anyone understand what she's trying to say? No one did. The girl stamped her feet anxiously and began writing on the ground with her cane. But she obviously did not come from a literate background and had no knowledge of characters, so she was unable to write anything helpful. Instead, she drew a pile of messy stick people, from which they were also unable to derive any meaning. Just at this time, the sound of hurried running echoed from somewhere far along the thoroughfare, as did the sound of a human panting. The ghost girl abruptly disappeared. Wei Wuxian wasn't concerned. She would probably find her way back later. Rapidly, he replaced the board in the window and returned to spying through the gap in the slats. The other disciples also wanted to see what was happening outside, so they all squeezed in front of the gap between the wall and the door and lined their heads from top to bottom, blocking the space with their gazes. The mystical fog had thinned for a bit, but now it slowly began to move. They saw a pathetic-looking figure break through the fog and run toward them. This person wore all black and appeared to be injured as he ran in a stumbling, haphazard manner. A sword hung from his waist, wrapped in black cloth. Is that the fog-faced man? Lan Jingyi whispered. It shouldn't be. The fog-faced man's posture and stride are completely different, Lan Zijue whispered in reply. Behind the figure, a horde of walking corpses were in hot pursuit. They were quick and caught up with him shortly. He drew his sword and met them head-on. The light of his blade shone clear and bright, slicing cleanly through the fog. Nice sword, Wei Wuxian exclaimed in his heart. But when the sword swept through the bodies, he heard the strange but familiar splashing again. Dark red powder sprayed from the walking corpse's severed limbs. The figure was surrounded. There was no place for him to dodge. The poison powder splattered all over his face where he stood. Alarmed, Lan Zijue whispered, "Senior Mo, this person, we..." Right then, another wave of walking corpses encircled the person in question, enveloping him. The circle grew tighter and tighter. He swung again, and even more poison burst from the bodies, forcing him to suck in even more of the substance. Already, he appeared unsteady. "We have to rescue him," Wei Wuxian said. "How are you gonna do that?" Jinling said. "You can't go over there. There's corpse poison floating around everywhere. As soon as you get near, you'll be poisoned." After thinking for a bit, Wei Wuxian left the window and walked into the inner part of the main room. The crowd of youths inadvertently turned their gazes to follow him, but only saw a motley collection of paper effigies standing silently between the two big flower wreaths. Wei Wuxian walked slowly before them, stopping in front of a pair of paper girls. The faces of the other paper effigies were all different, but the faces of these two girls appeared intentionally twinned. Their makeup, attire, and features were all identical. Their eyebrows were curved, and identical smiles graced their faces. It was almost possible to hear their giggling laughter. Their hair was brushed into twin buns, red earrings dangled from their ears, golden bracelets encircled their wrists, and embroidered shoes adorned their feet. They had every appearance of being a rich family's maids. "How about these two?" Wei Wuxian said. In one fluid motion, he brushed his hand across the blade of one of the juniors' unsheathed swords, creating a cut across his thumb. Turning, he drew two pairs of eyes on their faces. Immediately, he backed away a step, grinning slightly. "Smiling red lips and teasing eyes, ask not of good and evil, with this paint I summon thee. Arise." Out of nowhere, a gust of black wind flew, filling the entire shop in the blink of an eye. The crowd of youths couldn't help but grip their swords tightly. Suddenly, the twin effigies began shaking violently from head to toe. The next moment, real giggles floated out of their scarlet-painted mouths. The summoning of the painted eyes. The pair of beautiful paper effigies trembled with laughter, as though they had seen or heard something hilarious. At the same time, the eyeballs that had been painted in blood began to roll wildly in their sockets. The sight was truly enthralling, yet also truly eerie. Wei Wuxian stood in front of them, lowered his head slightly, and greeted them politely. The paper effigies returned his politeness by bowing. Wei Wuxian pointed outside. "Bring the living person inside. Eliminate everything else." Shrieking laughter tore from their mouths. A black wind buffeted the door, violently throwing it open. Pressed shoulder to shoulder, the pair of paper effigies swept outside and flew at the circle of walking corpses. It was difficult to believe that fake people that were clearly made of paper could be so violent and destructive. They pranced in exquisitely embroidered shoes and waved their light, floaty sleeves. One motion deprived a walking corpse of its arm, another half its head, as though the paper sleeves were sharp blades. The entire time, the paper effigies' charming laughter echoed all along the thoroughfare, disturbing the mind of anyone who heard it and causing their hair to stand on end. In only a short period, the twin girls chopped the 15 or 16 walking corpses into so many pieces they were impossible to reassemble. The dead body parts tumbled all over the ground. Having secured an overwhelming victory, the paper maids followed their orders and carried inside the weakened man who had been running from the walking corpses. They then jumped back out the main door, which closed on its own behind them. Quieting, one stood to the left of the entrance and one to the right, as though they were a pair of guardian lions standing guard in front of a palace. The disciples inside were speechless and stupefied. Previously, they had only heard descriptions of a few vile, unorthodox techniques from their seniors or from their books. At the time, they hadn't been able to understand it. If these techniques are so vile, why do so many people want to learn them? Why does the Yearling Lao Tzu have so many imitators? But now that they had seen one of these techniques with their own eyes, they finally knew why such practices were the subject of such fascination. Moreover, this was only the tip of the iceberg, this summoning of the painted eyes. Thus, once most of the youths had recovered from their stunned silence, their expressions, far from repulsed, were full of irrepressible excitement. They felt as though they had gained a lot of first-hand experience, and when they returned home, they would have a lot to tell their fellow disciples. Only Jinling's face was filled with disgust. Lan Sijue went over to help Wei Wuxian support the rescued man, but Wei Wuxian said, "Don't come over here. Be careful about coming into contact with corpse poison. If you slip and get some of your skin, you'll be poisoned." When the man had been carried in by the paper effigies, his strength had already left him, and he had been only half conscious. Now he had woken up a little and coughed a few times. He covered his mouth, as though worried that he would cough out the corpse powder and contaminate others. "Who are you?" His voice was filled with exhaustion. This question arose, in truth, not from the fact that he didn't recognize the people inside the room, but because he couldn't see anything at all. Thick white bandages were wrapped around his eyes. He was most likely blind. In addition to being blind, he was very attractive. The bridge of his nose was straight and prominent, and his thin lips were a light rose. He could easily have been described as handsome and charming. He also appeared very young, somewhere between boy and young adulthood. It was difficult to avoid feeling pity for his condition. "Why have I encountered so many blind people lately?" Wei Wuxian thought. "Either I've recently heard about them, or I've seen them myself, living and dead." Suddenly, Jinling spoke. "Hey, we still don't know who this guy is, or whether he's friend or foe. Why did we suddenly have to rescue him? If he's a bad guy, isn't that like rescuing a snake and bringing it inside?" He wasn't wrong to say this, but it was a bit awkward to do it directly in front of the man in question. However, the man wasn't angry, nor did he seem worried that he could be thrown out. He smiled slightly, revealing the tips of his canines. "This young master is very right. It's better if I go." Jinling hadn't expected this reaction. He stared, unsure what to say, and instead let out a Lan Sijue rushed to provide diplomatic moderation. "But it's also possible that he isn't bad. In any case, to see someone on the brink of death yet refuse to rescue them is against my clan's teachings." Jinling curled his lip. "Fine. You're good people. If someone gets killed, don't blame me. You... Lan Jingyi began, but before he could finish, he found himself tongue-tied. His eyes had fallen on the man's sword, which was leaning on the side of the table. Half the length of the black cloth wrapped around it had slipped off, revealing the body of the weapon. The sword had been forged with the utmost craftsmanship. Intricate frost patterns were etched into the bronze-colored scabbard. The blade was visible through the metalwork, shining like silver stars, twinkling like snowflakes. It had a beauty that was clear as ice, pure as jade, and dazzlingly brilliant. Lan Jingyi's eyes widened, and he seemed to be on the verge of blurting something out. Though Wei Wuxian didn't know what he was going to say, he knew that the sword's wielder must not have wanted others to see it, as he had wrapped it in black cloth. Instinctively, Wei Wuxian stuck out his hand and covered Lan Jingyi's mouth, while also placing a finger before his lips, telling the other astonished youths not to make a sound. It was best not to disturb the grass, lest it alerted a snake hiding among the blades. Jinling mouthed a couple of words to him, then stretched out his hand and wrote 2 characters on the dusty table. Shuang Hua. Shuang Hua, the sword? Wei Wuxian silently mouthed. Xiao Xingzhen's sword? Shuang Hua. Jinling and the others nodded in confident unison. Though the youths had never seen Xiao Xingzhen himself, Shuang Hua was a famous sword, the likes of which were rarely encountered. Not only was it very spiritually powerful, it also had a unique beauty. It was featured in innumerable collections of illustrations of cultivator swords, and the sight of it was difficult to forget. If the sword is Shuang Hua, and the person in possession of it is blind... The same thought occurred to one of the youths. Unable to stop himself, he reached out and touched the bandage wrapped around the man's eyes, hoping to remove it and see whether the orbs were still present. But as soon as the youth's hand brushed the piece of cloth, an agonized expression crossed the stranger's face. He couldn't help but draw back, as though terrified that something would come into contact with his eyes. Realizing that he had forgotten himself, the youth rapidly drew back his hand. I'm sorry, it wasn't intentional. The person raised his left hand, which was covered in a thin black glove. He looked as though he wanted to cover his eyes, but was afraid to touch them, probably because intolerable pain would result from even the lightest brush. His forehead was already covered in a layer of sweat. "It's all right," he managed to say. But his voice had a slight tremble. Based on this behavior, the stranger was almost certainly the man whose trail had been lost after the case of the Yueyang Chang clan had ended. Xiao Xingzhen. Xiao Xingzhen didn't yet know that he had been recognized. After the pain had passed, he groped around for Shuang Hua. Quickly and deftly, Wei Wuxian pulled the fallen black cloth back up. When Xiao Xingzhen found the sword, he nodded and said, "Many thanks for rescuing me. I'll take my leave now." "Don't go. You've fallen victim to corpse poisoning," Wei Wuxian said. "Is it very severe?" Xiao Xingzhen asked. "Yes. If it is severe, what point is there in staying? When all is said and done, no medicine can cure me. Better if I take the opportunity before my corpse transformation to kill a few more walking corpses." Upon hearing that Xiao Xingzhen did not care if he lived or died, the youths in the room felt their blood surge toward their heads. "Who said you can't be cured? Stay, he'll save you!" Lan Jingyi blurted out. "Me?" Wei Wuxian said. "Sorry, did you mean me?" He didn't have the heart to tell the truth. Xiao Xingzhen had ingested too much poison. His face was already turning dark red. Wei Wuxian was afraid the glutinous rice congee was no longer of any use. The poisoning was too severe. I have already killed many walking corpses in the city, Xiao Xingchen said. They've been following me the entire time, without end. After a little while, there will be another wave of them. If I stay, you'll be drowned in a sea of corpses. Sir, do you know why Yi City has become like this? Wei Wuxian asked. Xiao Xingchen shook his head. I do not. I'm only a wandering. When I arrived in the area, I learned that something was strange in the city, so I decided to night hunt here. There are many powerful living corpses and walking corpses around. You have yet to truly experience it. Some are very nimble and are impossible to avoid. Some spew clouds of powdered corpse poison when you cut them down. As soon as a powder touches you, it poisons you. But if you don't cut the corpses to pieces, they'll rush at you, bite you, and claw you, so you'll be poisoned all the same. It's truly difficult to deal with. From what I can hear, there are a number of very young masters with you, yes? If I could offer you advice, you should all leave as soon as you can. As soon as he finished, the Paper Sister's eerie giggles echoed through the main door again, shriller and louder than ever.